Hey everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Flynn Tracy, and I'm here with Tim Northey, aka TK North. How are you, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. It's awesome. It's been like a long time coming. It's kind of crazy that you haven't been on Adobe Live before. So thank you so much. I'm glad we could do this. This is part of a two-part series. We're focusing on Lightroom and photography and some time-lapse photography, which is the thing that you're mostly known for, right?
Yeah, so I guess a few different styles of photography, travel photography, but definitely time-lapse stuff is what I really enjoy shooting as well. So try and share quite a bit of time-lapse photography as well. And that's some of the stuff I've done with Adobe's definitely been around time-lapse. So yeah.
That must be why I've seen so much of your time-lapse photography, I think. Let's get some tunes going. How about that? There we go. A little bit of music. It's great to have you all here. Festus is in the house, R&B. Tim, hey Tim, how you doing? He's saying, hey, look, another Tim. Yes, Tims are taking over. That's awesome. Gonna turn the music down just a little bit. David Kemp is in the house. What's up, David? Great to see you. It was a great stream before with Voodoo Val. I think Sam was in here before. We're over at behance.net/live. So if you're watching this somewhere else, like over on YouTube, jump over there. That's the chat we're going to be using today. You can ask questions. You can say hi. Let us know if you're a photographer. I'm super keen the tunes are a bit loud. Yeah, sorting it out. Super keen to find out, like, are you a photographer? Do you have experience with photography today? We're always interested to know, like, kind of what audience we're talking to. Are you like me and just try to use Photoshop to like fix everything up in post because you're a terrible shot? Let us know. That would be cool. And while we're doing that, while you're saying hello, TK, maybe you could show us some of your work so we can get to know you a little better.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I've got kind of my Instagram open here, which is, I guess, where I share kind of most of my stuff. These are taken from more time-lapse clips. I'll go through some of the videos in a sec, so I'll just go through some photos. But I like to shoot a lot of kind of street photography as well, in kind of a bit of a different style with street photography, I guess, to more your traditional. But so especially I've spent quite a bit of time in Japan. I've got quite a few kind of street type shots from Japan. Mixture of, I guess, kind of a travel theme with most of the stuff I do, but a real mixture of work as well. So just going through, this is just my website, kind of Japan stuff. I guess the travel photography that I shoot, it's kind of a mixture between, like, I still shoot kind of your landscape shots. I kind of shoot kind of just these kind of natural, more street moments as well, and urban kind of scenes, but a real mixture of things. You can probably see, like, with my editing, particular colors, kind of orange and blue, I spend a bit of time on really kind of bringing out orange and blues, which is quite consistent with my editing. But can jump in and show some of the time-lapse stuff though, if we can.
Cool. So a lot of travel photography. So how have you been holding up over the last 6 months? I know some of the other photographers we've had on the travel, they're just like, I guess I'm just going through my old photos or editing friends' photos. What have you been up to in that sense?
I guess I'm lucky in a way that I've got a big backlog of work, and had a big Europe trip just before all this kicked off. So we got back in late January. So I've still got a lot of stuff that I haven't even finished editing from there, but I guess it's now a good excuse to maybe plan some things a bit more locally as well.
But
I've still got plenty of stuff I can edit and work on, so I'm pretty lucky in that regard.
For sure. Wow, where is this?
I'm just going to turn down the audio because it's coming through quite loud in my headphones. I'll just open it up in a different way. So this is shot in Dubai, and this is the clip that I did for the recent video with Adobe, which we can have a look at as well. So this is time-lapse clip. It's actually just two short time lapses kind of merged together rather than a big long day to night time lapse and then just edited in Premiere Pro.
Yeah, wow. And like, what's your normal kit for something like this? Are you using a DSLR or?
Yeah, so I guess I usually, when I travel especially, or most shoots, I usually carry two bodies. I shoot Canon, so I've got a Canon 5D Mark IV. I've also got the Canon EOS R. So I guess usually 5D I use as kind of my time-lapse camera. It's usually set up, and then I've got another body to shoot when I'm set up a time-lapse. Got a few more examples of some different time lapses here, and these kind of day to night transitions, which I kind of create more in post. So these again just two short time lapse clips kind of merged together rather than a big long one. So I often do this when I travel, when I don't have time to shoot a full day to night clip, which can take hours and hours and hours. So this is just two short clips which have only taken like 10 minutes to shoot. Right. So it's just I guess a shortcut or something that I've kind of adopted as I travel to get this effect.
Nice.
Similarly, I got one here from the US.
Yeah, wow.
So again, that kind of transition, these are actually two separate time lapses. Usually, I guess for most people, you just shoot a really long sequence from kind of before sunset until the night. But this was kind of one sequence. You can see where it kind of merges into the second one. It's just two clips merged together, one at night, so the Astro time lapse, and then the one from the daytime. So it's just a bit of a different way to shoot time lapses as well, but it can save you a bit of time. And usually it's just something I've done when I am traveling and I don't have the ability to leave my camera there for 6 hours or something. I can still kind of come up with clips like this. So,
yeah, wow.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. There's a question from the other Tim.
Yep.
Are you looking for more motion blur in your videos, or do you prefer crystal clear frames?
With time-lapse, I guess the big advantage of shooting time-lapse, you can get nice motion blur, as opposed to, like, if you're shooting video and you just speed it up, you can still get the same effect, but you're not going to get any motion blur. So I guess for things like that, I'm usually trying to get a bit of motion blur. So that's the advantage of shooting time-lapse, I guess. So yeah, cool. Always try and get a bit of movement in the frame.
Yeah, nice. Okay, cool. Well, let's jump into some of the stuff that we're going to show today. We're going to be, you're going to be showing us some of your techniques in Lightroom, which is awesome. This is part of a two-part series, and then next week we'll be kind of digging into some of those After Effects and time-lapse techniques and things like that. So let's check out what's going on with Lightroom as we are. Yeah, just a reminder, bunch of new people that have joined, if you're watching on YouTube, to jump over to behance.net/live. You can ask questions. There's a little timer that will come up down the bottom. We have a bit of a Q&A break in the middle, but feel free to ask questions as we're going along. But we do take like a 5-minute break in the middle to make sure that we give TK a break and also ask some of those more meaning of life questions. So questions about photography, freelancing, what we're showing you today, all that sort of stuff, just drop them in chat. Cool. Yeah, let's jump over to your desktop. There's our little timer there, so you can see we've got 30 minutes. About 33 minutes until the Q&A break.
Cool, that should work through. I'm just going to start with a pretty basic edit in Lightroom. Just, I guess for me, even with my time-lapse photography, such a large percentage of my time is in Lightroom and editing the photos. The final steps in, say, Premiere Pro and stuff are usually quite simple for me. It's usually the time in Lightroom that's probably the largest percentage of my time. So I'm just going to go through pretty basic edit from start to finish. Hopefully a few tips along the way, just using my workflow. How I edit time lapses is probably quite similar. So I'll go through that a bit later on as well though.
Awesome.
So this particular shot, it's a pretty simple one, but you've got, I guess, really nice light hitting the mountain. This was actually taken in Austria. So earlier in the year, just before all this kicked off, as I mentioned, we were in Europe, me and my fiance. So this is one of the places we visited, Salzburg. So I guess the thing I want to start with, and I guess just a general tip for editing in Lightroom, I always have my lens corrections turned on. So I've always got these two boxes ticked. It's really handy. I've actually got it turned on. If you come into your preferences in Lightroom and come across to presets, you can actually turn it on so everything that you import automatically has those lens corrections already turned on. It's something that for every photo I have it turned on. So that's why for this, you can come down to optics, which is like a preset already in Lightroom, and just turn on lens corrections. So it just saves you a bit of time. Every file that you bring into Lightroom will already have those lens corrections turned on. So that's handy.
And is that lens correction based on which camera you're using? So like you would set it up for, you're shooting with the same camera, or?
More on the lens. So if you see down here, it says lens profile Sigma. It tells you which lens you use, and it will basically remove like any distortion, any vignetting that's come from the lens, and also your chromatic aberration. So any kind of little glitches of color or anything like that have come from the lens. So that's why you generally should have it on for pretty much all your photos. There's no real reason why you wouldn't. So that's why for everything that I import, I just have that turned on.
Yeah.
So it saves a bit of time. You don't have to come down and do that for each of your photos when you're editing. And of course you can do this with other presets as well. For instance, you can see here, you can do it based on camera as well. So if you had one camera you shoot, say, all your landscape, or like I've got here, this Hasselblad one is my drone, for example. And I've got it set up so every file that I bring in from comes in with this Adobe landscape color profile, lens corrections, and a little bit of noise reduction, depending on the ISO of the image. So you can set up different cameras. It's really handy to use presets in this way because it just speeds up your workflow a little bit. In the same way, you can do it when you import photos as well directly in, just for that import rather than kind of every import. You can do it just for one particular import, which is really handy if you're shooting events or anything like that where you're going to edit the photos quite similar. You might be using a preset. You might want to just apply one particular tone curve or one particular part of Lightroom to all those photos. You can do it right at the import as well. So those are kind of things that I do to speed up my workflow a little bit.
Festus in chat was saying, a Hasselblad on a drone. How big and powerful is that drone?
Yeah, they're pretty amazing. I've got the Mavic 2, which has a Hasselblad sensor. So
wow,
the image quality is just getting better on the drone. So yeah,
nice. Benjamin
so
Lee in the chat, by the way. So Ben says hi. Hello, Benjamin Lee. Ichiban is in the chat. Good to see you, buddy.
Thanks for joining. Yeah, so that's where I start with editing. I always make sure, obviously, those lens corrections are turned on, which simple kind of tip to speed up your workflow, having them on already. I guess the next thing I kind of always start with is the tone curve. It's probably the most powerful tool in Lightroom to affect your overall image. So I always start with the tone curve and make some adjustments there. I guess for anyone who's not familiar with the tone curve, I just give a quick kind of crash course.
Yeah.
Basically that one line represents the entire image. You can see if I kind of drag it down how it changes. So basically you've got like the darkest parts of your image, you've got the shadows down the bottom, your midtones will be reflected in that middle part of the curve, and then your highlights up the top, or the brightest parts of the image. So for instance, if I just put a couple of points on there, if I drag this top one, you can see it just affects more those brighter parts, the highlights. Down the bottom, just the shadows, and then your midtones in the middle. And that's why just with a few simple adjustments, you can kind of affect your image quite drastically. So tone curve's really, really powerful. I know for me starting out editing, it was a little bit confusing, so I probably didn't use it for a while, but it is super powerful. Yeah, so making my adjustments there, I start with the shadows. For this one, I'm just gonna darken that a little bit, make sure kind of the mountain is really standing out. Those midtones, I'm just gonna probably bring up a little bit. You can see that's just brightened it up and kind of added in a nice bit of contrast. And the highlights, in a similar way, I'll just bring those up a little bit. So kind of 3 quick adjustments. You can kind of see how that's, if I turn it off, you can see how it's already affected the image.
So like, what are you looking for in that sense? Like, I noticed they all went up a little bit, and maybe another way to say it is what situation would make you bring the curves down, or like, I want to lower the midturns, or do you find that you're often turning things up a bit?
It depends on the photo. So this one, naturally, I shot probably a little bit underexposed, so it's a little bit dark. So that's why I like the midtones and highlights are coming up a little bit. Right. Often I'll bring the shadows down a little bit because you can see how it adds a bit more contrast. For this one, because it's already quite dark, I haven't brought it down too much. But even that, it just creates a little bit more contrast in the image. So I guess it depends on the image a little bit, but also how you shot it, whether it was a bit underexposed or a little bit overexposed.
Cool.
So that's pretty basic adjustments on the tone curve. You can kind of really fade that out if you want to as well, which I don't tend to do for my landscaping images. It makes them look a little bit flat by bringing that up. For portraits and different things, it can be a nice effect to kind of fade it out a little bit like that. It's just kind of fading out the darkest parts of the image. So that's a pretty common look that you see as well. But yeah, for landscapes, you can see how it just flattens it out a bit too much. So I don't tend to do that too much on these landscape type images. But yeah, I always start with the tone curve and make those kind of basic adjustments there. And then I'll come to kind of the overall tone of the image and make a few more adjustments and just make some tweaks here. So this one's quite dark. I just bring up those shadows a little bit. Again, some of these I'll do pretty consistently, but some of them will depend on the image itself. So just some minor tweaks there. I won't tend to change texture and clarity too much here. So I tend to use radial filters for that type of thing. So I'm just affecting part of the image and not the whole image. For instance, on this one, I'd probably want to add in a little bit of clarity and texture to that area of the mountain where the light's hitting. So I'd grab radial filter, which is up here. Make sure that's feathered out. Just make sure it's up to 100, so it's going to be a bit more subtle in the way that it applies these settings, and just add in a nice bit of clarity, maybe a little bit of texture as well. You can see how in a way it kind of just sharpens that up and makes it a bit more punchier in that area.
Yeah.
And that's why I tend to use radial filters for this, especially with clarity. You can see, like, if you really bump up the clarity, how it not only it really changed the overall tone of the image, even your saturation a little bit. So you just want to be a bit careful not going too heavy with your clarity sliders.
Yeah. Is that like a beginner's thing to like avoid, like kind of like I've heard sharpness is like another thing that like people were doing like quite a lot, or something that you might do really early on that tend to kind of fade back away from, like the more you do it?
I think so. And I think it's something when I started, like I used to like this really kind of gritty, grungy, like really, really high clarity image, which you still see a lot of. And some people, I guess like that. But yeah, I've definitely toned it back over the years. I know I used to edit when I started out with a lot of clarity, and there's still no problems, I guess, if that's the look you're going for. But I've definitely toned it back quite a bit.
Nice.
And texture, in a way, it's quite similar. The biggest difference for me is your clarity is going to affect the overall image a lot more, the overall tone a lot more, whereas the texture, as the name suggests, you can just see as I bring that up, it still has kind of a similar effect, but it's adding more texture just to the mountain or areas where there is a bit of texture. So things like trees, bark, mountain here, or kind of hair, those type of things, it can add in a little bit more detail. And then different from sharpening again. So there's so many different tools in Lightroom where the end result may be similar, but there's just different ways to achieve it.
Yeah. There was a question. It's funny. James T just asked, "What's the difference between clarity and texture?" And I think you just answered it as you were going through, which is cool. So.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, James. That's the biggest one. Just the overall kind of tone and even saturation. You start to get affected as you push clarity up. So yeah, basic adjustments there. The other thing I could do with this radial filter that I've put on the mountain there, if I really wanted to bring out this orange that was kind of hitting the mountain there and kind of emphasize that, I could bring up my temperature. Of course, this new update, which has just come in with Lightroom, you can actually pick any color that you want to kind of add in, which is really cool. You used to only be able to use kind of your white balance, but now obviously I don't want to make that green, but for instance, if you had something that you wanted to change the color, this is a really handy update that's just come into Lightroom, so that's pretty cool as well. Just going to reset that. I'm still in the habit of using white balance just because that used to be, I guess, the only way to really change the color. So for that one, I'll just bump it up a little bit. And the other thing with your radial filters, which is really handy, which I use all the time, is your luminance mask. So basically all this does, if you want it to affect just a brighter part within that radial filter or just a darker part, you can use your luminance mask, and if I slide that up, it's just going to affect the brighter areas, or from the other side, it'll just affect the darker area. So it's not going to get that area behind the mountain as much.
Oh, cool.
If I turn on, you can kind of see where it's just on the mountain as opposed to that area behind it. So that's really handy as well. I use that for my radial filters all the time, your luminance mask there. So I guess moving on with this edit, the next thing I want to do is I'll probably come down and adjust the detail a little bit. I won't spend a lot of time here, but I'll just do a little bit of sharpening. I tend to just sharpen a little bit. Again, sharpening and noise reduction kind of depends on your ISO that the image was shot at. Higher ISO, right. Obviously you're going to get more noise. You may have to use more noise reduction and sharpen it a little bit more. So for this one, ISO 400, I'm not going to have to do heaps of noise reduction, but I'd probably do a little bit just in case there was some noise. You can zoom in to check, but I guess I kind of base it on what ISO I shot the image at.
So is that like kind of you start out as like a mathematical kind of thing, like, you know, based on the ISO it's probably going to be about here, and then you just eyeball, give or take a little bit?
I guess, yeah, over time you kind of work out how much you need depending on the ISO. Like for instance, like I shoot a lot of kind of, if I'm shooting like street photography at night where it's quite dark, I really push the ISO. You're going to get a lot more noise. That noise reduction, it is going to kind of make your image a little bit less sharp. So you want to apply as much as you can get away with, or you need to, without making it obviously lose too much of the sharpness. So yeah, cool. Over time, I guess you kind of work it out. Even some of these default kind of presets actually apply, you can see NR at the end there, actually apply a level of noise reduction based on the ISO. So these are pretty new to Lightroom as well. So it'll apply less for a lower ISO and it'll apply a lot more if you shoot at a higher ISO automatically. So that's pretty cool as well.
That is cool. Just a couple of comments in chat. What a talented guy. How do I grow facial hair like that? That was Matt. Might be a mate of yours.
Yeah, sounds like Matt Horsepool.
Sounds like it's something a friend would say in chat. Hello, Matt.
Yeah.
Tim was also saying, where are we? Clarity is like salt. Add a bit to, and your food will taste great, but bad food will not taste good if you add nothing but salt. I like we always love a food analogy here.
Yeah, I like that one. Thanks, Tim.
Nice one.
I might steal that for the next session.
There we go. Cool.
Yeah, so sharpening, I won't spend too much time on here. Your masking with sharpening, I always like to hit option so you can kind of see exactly what you're doing. A little bit of a lag there, sorry. But your mask basically means you can pick the area where you want to apply your sharpness to. So you can see like down the bottom here, it's going to apply kind of sharpening to pretty much all the image. As I slide across, it's a bit more selective in the area that I'm going to apply that sharpening to. So that's quite handy as well when you don't want to obviously sharpen the entire image. You might want to just sharpen the mountain, which is what I'd want to do here. So just bump that up a little bit. And I always hit option when I do this because it gives you this kind of gray or black and white. You can see kind of exactly the level of sharpness that you're applying. So just quick adjustments there. And I guess the next thing once you've adjusted the tone and all of those things is color. And that's what I probably spend the most time on when I'm editing color. There's so many different ways to kind of manipulate your color in Lightroom. And for me, I guess hard to put a percentage, but most of the time in Lightroom is probably playing around with color.
Right.
So obviously, I guess the first where you start with color is your white balance, which for this one, the white balance I'm pretty happy with, but you can always adjust the white balance. This selector tool is pretty handy, how I usually do it. Pick kind of a white or neutral area and it will set the white balance based on that area that you've selected. So that one's a little bit, you can then kind of adjust your sliders from there if you're not quite happy with it.
So that was, those pixels were gray. So you mean you're picking something that should be white in the camera, like snow is white, or just trying to get an understanding of that?
Or what you want to be white if you're changing it a little bit. So that snow, if there was, say, that sunlight on it, I don't probably want it to be exactly white. But yeah, you're trying to pick an area that should be, or you want to be neutral or white in that image. And then it will adjust the white balance according to that area. So it's a pretty handy tool. You've got your presets as well, like auto, which depending on the photo, like I don't really like how orange that is. I prefer how it was kind of shot. So you don't have to use those, but they give you a bit of a guide as well. So the next one and the next way you can play around with color is actually in the tone curve, which I don't tend to play around with color in the tone curve a lot. If you come across, you've got obviously the overall tone of your image represented here. You've also got your colored curves. So for each of these in your red, you've got red and cyan. It's basically adding in color to those areas. So you've still got your shadows, midtones, highlights, but you can kind of add in a color to each of those depending on each of these. Green, you've got magenta there as well, and blue and yellow. So they're good for making subtle adjustments, but I wouldn't suggest going kind of too heavy here because you can kind of ruin an image pretty quickly as well. So sometimes I might do some really subtle adjustments in here as well. So for that one, I'm just going to add in, that little bit of blue, just changes. You can use this in a similar way to your split tones as well, like to add in color to shadows and highlights. So you can see if I pull that up, it just makes the image a lot more blue in general, mostly through the midtones. You can then pull that down so it's not adding that to your shadows as much. And same with your highlights.
And I noticed that you were like taking a lot of these things to the extreme to like obviously to show us, but is that something that you'll do as well, like push something to the extreme and then kind of bring it back just to see really clearly what it's doing? Because I find a lot of the changes with Lightroom are very subtle, and like over time, if you show the original to the final version, it's like it's chalk and cheese, right? Like there's such a big difference. But when you're making these very small, very subtle changes over time, it can be a little bit, I guess, you know, to the novice or maybe someone that's not as experienced, it's very, very subtle. So do you do that, or
I guess
benefit?
When I'm probably more for when I'm doing tutorials and stuff, I'm just in the habit of doing that. For me, I'm probably a bit more kind of know where I want certain things without even seeing them sometimes. So it's just because you've done it so many times. But for something like this, it's, I guess, just a habit to show kind of examples. Nice. For some things I probably do push it just to see, but yeah. So yeah, if I turn the tone curve off there, in general, you can see obviously the overall tone's affected, but it's also changed the color a little bit. So just slight adjustments you can make with your colors there in the tone curve. Similar with your split tones, and this is another one that, like you said, it's probably a really subtle adjustment for most people when they're using split tones. But again, that end result of all your other changes as well. So a similar way, like split toning is just where you can obviously add color to highlights and the shadows. So for me, I'm usually adding in similar colors, like for my highlights, and I've just hit option there again, so you can actually see which color you're applying. So I tend to add in a little bit of orange to my highlights, which I only like to bring up maybe a little bit. So usually it's somewhere between maybe 10 to 15. You can see if I bring that up, it's a lot more obvious, usually quite subtle with these. So let's go 15 there. And then shadows, I typically like to add in a little bit of blue or aqua. Just bring that back a little bit. You can use the selection tool as well, which kind of shows you what you're doing as you go. So that's just another way to adjust it. So I'll go about there for blue, and I'll just get out of that. Again, if I turn that off, you can see it's not super obvious anything I've done there. It's really subtle, but it just kind of helps add kind of a consistent feel to images, split toning, I think. So I'm most of my adjustments for split tones would be similar for most images.
So just a couple of questions around that. So just on, you mentioned kind of adding orange is something that you'll do. Is that purely for like landscape photography when there's a bit of sun, or it's shot at a certain time of day, or is it all images?
For split toning, I'm pretty consistent with my editing. Some of those other things, depending on whether, especially like if you're comparing, say, a portrait shot to a landscape shot, some of the color changes that I'll do later on will be very, very different, especially around the oranges because of your skin tones. But for your split tonings, which are quite subtle adjustment, I would say most of my editing is quite consistent with split tones.
Oh, awesome. And also, I'm asking a lot of questions, but guys, you can ask questions in chat as well. Again, if you're watching on YouTube or somewhere, we're over at behance.net/live if you want to ask your questions. We've got a Q&A break in less than 10 minutes, so throw them in and I'll ask TK.
Cool. So I'll jump through this edit a bit more. So split toning, as I said, pretty subtle. The other thing I like to kind of play around with when I'm doing color is camera calibration. So camera calibration is just another way to tweak your colors. There's many different ways in Lightroom. For instance, like your blues, you can bring a little bit more towards aqua, which I like to do a little bit. You can bring your reds a little bit more towards orange. And definitely with your last question, this is where if I was editing a portrait or something different, I would be a lot more subtle with these changes in camera calibration because it changes your skin tones quite a bit. But for me, if I just turn that off, you can see how it's just changed those blues a little bit. Again, to show you, I can make it a little bit more dramatic how much it kind of changes the colors a little bit. So the last step in that one would be kind of HSL or color tabs, which is, I guess, probably what most people are familiar with for adjusting color. So this is where you can tweak each of the individual colors, kind of the intensity or the saturation of each of those colors, and also the luminance. So luminance is basically how much light reflects off that color. So let's go with blue because there's lots of blue in the sky. You can see if I kind of drag that, how it affects kind of the reflection of light off that color. So if you bring it down, it almost makes it kind of darker, less reflective of light. The other direction, it really brightens it up. So with my blues, I tend to bring that down a little bit and sometimes bring that saturation down a little bit as well, which sometimes I'll bring that right down. It gives it more of like, it almost looks gray where the blues are. And sometimes I like that kind of feel. Even though my editing comes out quite blue as an end result, I'm usually turning down the saturation of the blue. So gives it that kind of blue-gray type of feel. Hue, the blue, I'm kind of happy with that kind of shade. I might want to bring my oranges and yellow a little bit more towards orange, which I've done there. But for this one, I'm probably not going to tweak the HSL too much. I'm kind of happy it's already got a nice kind of blue and orange feel, which I typically like when I'm editing. So I'm pretty happy with that. The last thing that I'd probably want to do with this image, if I come back to my basic, I might just want to brighten those shadows up a tiny bit. I've already added in that one radial filter here. The second one I'd add in for this image is a nice big one over to the side, which is where kind of the natural sunlight's coming from. And I do this just to kind of increase that a little bit or enhance it a little bit, just by using exposure. So I guess that when you're doing this, it's good to know, you can look where your shadows are, or if you know where the sun was shot, you can obviously tell where the light's coming from. I usually use a radial filter just to bring that out a little bit more if I want to. So for instance there, I've brought up that exposure a little bit. I might want to even add in a little bit of a haze, which gives it more of that kind of hazy sunlight feel. And I like to soften it a little bit as well, so just reduce the clarity a little bit. Again, I'll use the range mask, luminance. If I just show with the area that it's affecting, I want it to affect the area behind the mountain and not so much on the mountain. So you can see kind of, it's really brightened up this area on the mountain. I just want it to affect more the sky. If I use my range mask and slide in from this side, you can see I kind of get that area on the mountain back, whereas it's still quite bright in the background.
Yeah.
So that's why your luminance range mask is so handy. When you're adding in your radial filters, it's only going to affect the area that you want it to. You don't even need to grab a brush and draw it in. You can be quite selective in the area that you want to affect. So pretty quick edit for me there, but kind of before and after.
Yeah.
It's just kind of brightened up the area on the mountain and that area of sunlight coming from the left.
Yeah, that's awesome. And would you shoot something like this with like a tripod, or are you shooting, like how are you shooting it?
This one was just handheld.
Just handheld.
Yeah, so I think I was actually running a time lapse on a tripod and using my other camera to run around and shoot different things as the sun was rising. So this one was just shot handheld.
Cool. Oh, awesome. Well, we're about 2 minutes from Q&A, but we can jump into questions now if you like, or up to you. Yeah,
it's probably a good time to do that.
For questions. Sweet. All right. Well, let's jump over, make our heads big, and answer some of these questions. There's been a lot of praise for your work. We got Paul Campbell in chat saying hi, Tim. Shane is saying, hi, Tim, massive fan of your work. And we've got like a whole bunch of questions. So I'll start with one of mine because I'm rude. And I'll just push into the front of the line. I notice, do you ever like...
You can.
no one can stop me. Do you ever jump into Photoshop and then into Lightroom? Like you were talking about the foreground and background there and how you can isolate that with your color and your highlights. But would you ever like jump into Photoshop, like clone stamp something out, or like is there any, or do you spend all of your time in Lightroom using the filters and adjustments in there?
Yeah, definitely for little adjustments. I think I've even got an example here. So here's just kind of a street shot, cute little
look at that outfit.
School in Japan.
God.
Yeah, it's great. Nice little bit of morning light. You can see this car, for instance, that's just caught into the frame. You can see kind of a final edit. I've kind of got rid of that in Photoshop. So there's a big before and after of kind of the original. And then, so the process for me there would be editing in Lightroom. I'd then, when I'm happy with the edit, I'd open it up in Photoshop, remove or tweak as needed, and then automatically bring it back into Lightroom. And if I need to adjust it again, or I want to change anything, I'd do it again in Lightroom before exporting or using the photo.
And is that process pretty typical? Like Lightroom edit first, then into Photoshop, and then back into Lightroom just to make sure that everything's still looking good?
Yep, that's pretty typical for me, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. I love that little uniform. The kid is cute as.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite shots, actually. I really like it.
Festus was asking, what specialized protective gear do you have for your cameras, like for winter shooting to protect against super cold or snow or rain or anything?
I find, like, I use Canon. I find the weather sealing's pretty great. The batteries are pretty good. I haven't had any issues with needing anything too extra. I've got a bit of a sleeve if I want to keep a time-lapse running that I can pop my camera in if it's getting really wet. But other than that, I'm not using anything. Batteries and stuff, I've heard people say to try and keep them warm, or can use hand warmers.
Right.
I think
like the hand warmers that you get
that.
And then like wrap it around your lens or battery or something.
Or keep it, near your batteries just to keep them warm in the cold. But to be honest, I haven't had any issues running. Like I was in Iceland end of last year, pretty cold during their winter. Even running time lapses, you definitely won't get quite as long out of your batteries, but I didn't have any problems with them kind of dying too quickly or anything. It's just they won't last quite as long, which I guess is expected. But yeah, I haven't had any real problems shooting in snow or rain.
Have you ever shot a time lapse so long that like you need to replace the battery halfway through? Like, is that something you can do?
Yeah, like I've shot, probably the longest time lapse would be 8 or 10 hours. So I've got a battery grip for my 5D as well, which means you got 2 batteries at once. And
right.
Canon batteries are pretty good, so that lasts pretty well. Thankfully, I've never had too many issues with batteries dying on me.
Nice. What are some of the things new photographers or hobbyists should avoid when editing in Lightroom?
I guess probably the biggest one, and I was probably guilty of it early on, is especially if you're editing portraits or people, just being careful with your skin tones. So it's very easy to really push your colors and tweak your colors and kind of lose skin tones. So that's probably a big one that you see with kind of anyone that's new to editing or photography. And as I said, I definitely did it. But most things, like, you kind of need to learn, I guess. So you want to play around with you maybe want to. I look back at some of my early edits and think, what was I thinking? So
right, it's kind of a rite of passage. Like you kind of have to go through it and then realize, come back.
Yeah, and you also learn what you like and how you like to edit and all of those things. So I don't think, and that's a great thing about photography. Obviously, there's more traditional ways to do things, but it's your image. You edit how you like, you do what you want. If you want to edit in Photoshop and kind of manipulate it a lot, that's totally up to you. So I guess there's certain things that some people avoid, but play around with it, and that's how you kind of work out what you like and what you don't like as well.
That's cool. Good advice. How did you find, how long did it take you to find the color tone that you love to use?
I think I'm still developing it, to be honest. And I think it's an ongoing thing. It's not something that I know there's a few photographers out there, you look at their kind of their body of work and it's so consistent. They've got the same color tones for years even, but I feel like mine's constantly changing. It's probably similar, and probably people think that it hasn't changed, but for me, it's always changing and developing. So, and I think that's part of developing your own style as well. For me, especially early on, I found wanting to emulate so many different people that you end up with kind of a mishmash, and that's how you kind of come to your own style in a way. You kind of take in different pieces that you like and try and make it work in your own way.
Yeah, awesome. I really like that. I guess my follow-up question with that as well is, when you're editing a single image like this, and I'm sure the answer is it depends on where it's going, but are you thinking about like your feed and your website? Like, are you trying to have a consistent style? And we can talk about Instagram or a body of work in general, but yeah, you're trying to find a consistent style. Are you happy to be kind of changing it around? Benjamin Lee, who is in chat, Ichiban has done a live stream with us talking about that, like having a consistent feed and how to get it. So is that something that you actively try to do? Something that happens accidentally, or are you not too fussed about it?
No, I'm pretty conscious of it, especially for something like Instagram. I'm very conscious of it. It's something I think early on, again, it's kind of, I was very torn between wanting to have a consistent style and wanting to experiment and try different things. And to be honest, you kind of need to find somewhere in between the middle, I think, to really, I didn't want to keep editing the same way. I find it kind of boring in a way as well. So you want to try different things. But at the same time, I think having some kind of consistency is both beneficial for things like client work. If they kind of know what they're getting, they know what you kind of, how your images look, they'll know what they're getting. So it's good to have some consistency.
Yeah.
In saying that, some of my, I guess, client stuff may look quite different to what I post on Instagram, depending on what I'm shooting it for. Maybe a lot more natural, kind of without kind of too much playing around with the color. So it does depend where it's for, but I think consistency is important as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, you can keep the questions coming, guys, but we might jump into part two, like the second part. Jump back over to your screen now. So yeah, I know there's been some more people that have joined us again. So yeah, we're here with TK North. We've got about another 45 minutes or 40 minutes or so left. We're past our Q&A, designated Q&A time, but feel free to ask your questions as we go in, and if we have time, we'll answer them as we're going on.
Cool.
So jumping in over to your screen now. I
guess the next part I want to go through is kind of how I would edit time lapses, which again, as I said, like my first, I guess the process in Lightroom is quite similar. I may be a little bit more subtle on my editing, but I'm trying to achieve, I guess, a similar result in many ways. So here, similar to some of the examples that I showed early on, I've got one time-lapse kind of sequence. So I've got about 200 photos there. So this one was only shot, it was over maybe 10 minutes, and I've got the same thing from the same location at night. I've got another 200 photos there.
Wow.
So this is something that, like, if I'd shot kind of a day to night sequence of leaving my camera there that entire time, I would have had a lot more photos. So this is, as I said, it's just a different way to make a day to night time lapse. It's a way to save a bit of memory, and it's a way, especially when you're traveling. For instance, this one in Rome, like I didn't have the time to spend 6 to 8 hours shooting a nice day to night sequence, which I would have loved to have been able to do, but time wise, when you're traveling, it's sometimes quite difficult to allow 8 hours in one spot or 6 hours in one spot.
Yeah.
So I guess I've developed this way to kind of cheat in a way, and you get kind of one sequence. I try and line it up. You can see if I come down to the night one, they're not quite lined up real well.
Yeah.
But they're close. So I try and use the viewfinder. I'll pick different points. Like I would have picked a spot on the Colosseum, use the same focal length, the same lens, and had my tripod in the same spot. Tried to line it up as best as possible. Just because I know that, like, I took these two separate clips that I'd want to make something out of them together. So I guess that's something you need to plan for. And I do this quite a bit with these day to night clips because I like the effect that you get out of it. It also means you can create kind of photos like this where you've got, like I've used a multiple of photos there from these time-lapse clips, added in a few more people. You've got kind of the night on the left coming across to the day. So that was edited.
Yeah, that's awesome.
In Photoshop, but I really like that effect as well. And it means you can be really picky. If you've shot a time-lapse, you've got so many different frames to pick from. If I didn't like these prams, for instance, I could have kind of used a different frame, and you can just kind of erase. If you've got them all stacked on top, you can just erase different areas and kind of pick different areas that you want in the photo or you don't want in the photo. So that's why I love shooting these kind of separate clips. Gives you a lot of freedom. I can create so many different kind of things just from shooting two short time-lapse clips.
Yeah.
So I like that as well. It gives you, even later on, like there's still stuff I could create with these two clips that I haven't had time to do. So that's why I've always got, I guess, a backlog of work.
So dumb question. So you're basically going to this location twice. So you're going like one in the morning and then one at night. So you know, if you're, I guess that's like super useful as well. If you're like, so many of these places are like photographer hotspots, right? Like Demis and Ben, who have been on, who are phenomenal photographers as well, travel photographers, and I know you guys know each other quite well. You know, they'll say there's like this spot, and when you go there, you might be there you can only be there for 4 hours or 2 hours or maybe 10 minutes or something. And everyone's trying to get the same shot, and you see it like, you know, Leaning Tower of Pizza style, like everyone's like trying to get, you know, they're trying to feed their feed too, right? So I guess this technique is super practical, right? You can go there, get one shot, and then leave and come back, get another one, and it's incredible. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's why I've kind of developed it and use it so much now. Like even like this one in Rome, I think we'd just done a little bit of a tour. I just set the tripod up briefly, had a little bit of a break. We went and had some lunch and had a bit of a drink, and then came back and I set the tripod up for another 10 minutes once the sun had gone down. So it is really handy, and you can come up with a lot of different things just from doing that. So something that I do quite a bit of now.
Nice.
Which that video that we were kind of talking about that I've just done with Adobe is basically in the same way. I've just shot one sequence, same location during the day, same thing at night, and then kind of merged them together and lined them up a bit better in Premiere Pro.
Nice.
So if I go through and edit at any time lapse, sometimes I also use LR time-lapse, which is basically just software that it still allows you to edit in Lightroom, which is why I love it so much, but it's just time-lapse kind of specific software. So I'll use that more for this clip because it's shot, the light hasn't changed much during the sequence. I don't need to use it. There's no flickering, and it was all shot in manual, so it'll be quite consistent. LR time-lapse is great if you've shot like a day to night sequence and the light's changing quite a bit. You can use it to kind of adjust throughout the sequence and also fix things like flickering as well.
So that's like ELA time-lapse. I'm sure chat will want the link to that. Is that what it is?
LR time-lapse, so Lightroom.
LR time-lapse.
LR.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So it's kind of like it's software. It's like a plugin. Still allows you to edit all your stuff in Lightroom.
Nice. Awesome.
So for this one, as I said, I don't need to use anything like that because the light's not changing throughout the sequence. So what I would generally do is just start by editing one of the photos and then just copy it across the entire sequence, because as I said, the light's not changing, so it's going to look the same applying that edit to the entire shot. So I might just quickly run through a real kind of simple edit and copy that across. If there's any questions along the way of kind of what I'm doing or anything like that, we can kind of jump in, but
awesome.
I won't spend a lot of time since I've already kind of gone through all these adjustments a little bit.
Awesome.
But
so let us know, chat. Yeah. So if there were any more of those questions, let us know.
Yeah. If there's anything you want to stop on or come back to, we can. But in the same way, I'd often always start with tone curve, those basic adjustments a little bit as well. Again, I'd use a radial filter on the Colosseum there just to bring a little bit of clarity and texture to that. I might want to bring up the whites a little bit. Just adds your eye into the Colosseum a little bit more and doesn't add that clarity and texture to the rest of the image. So it just makes the Colosseum stand out a little bit more. In the same way, you can see kind of where the shadows are falling on these people, the light's coming in from the side. So I'd probably put another radial filter over to the side of the image just to kind of bump that up a little bit. You can see where the light's hitting the Colosseum. So again, I'll just kind of play around and maybe increase that a little bit, which whenever I'm doing this for where the sunlight is, typically I will kind of increase the exposure a little bit. I often like to soften it, so reduce the clarity a little bit and just add in a tiny bit of a haze as well. You can see kind of gives it that kind of light feel. I don't want to go kind of too heavy on that though. So that's pretty consistent when I'm adding in light with a radial filter. I'll do that. So they're just a few quick adjustments. Again, camera calibration, I might want to just tweak a little bit just to bring it a little bit more towards aqua. Just bring that across a little bit. And I haven't done too much here, but if I hit before and after, you can see how it's just made kind of overall adjustments to the image without going too heavy on the edit. Increase that light a little bit across the side. And that's probably where I'd want to copy that across to the entire sequence. So I just select my entire sequence, sync, and make sure everything's ticked. And that will apply those settings to every photo in that sequence.
Wow.
So the next step would be just to export that. Now, as I said, like a lot of time lapses, you will need to think about things like flickering or changing light. For this one, it's consistent, so I can just edit it in Lightroom like that and export it, no problems.
So you mean flickering like lights, like if there are like cars or street lights or like changes?
No, so
is that what you mean? No.
Yeah, so I'll show you what I mean. So for instance, if the exposure is slightly different, and this also depends on how you shoot it. For instance, if you're shooting, say, all manual, your shutter speed, everything's going to be consistent throughout. If you're shooting something like on aperture priority or shutter priority, you're going to have the camera settings changing a little bit. And even as the light changes, for instance, let's just make this one a tiny bit darker. When you play that back as a time lapse, so it's each frame, each photo is a frame, obviously. So it will actually flicker if it's going from one photo that's darker to one that's lighter.
Right, because it's only a single frame, so it's just popping up really quickly, and that's the flicker, right?
Yeah, so the more changes in light, or if your settings aren't consistent, you're going to get more flickering. And you can actually fix that, and that's where like you can do it in different ways in After Effects or things like LR Time-lapse, which I use. It's just time-lapse software. It's really handy for that. Basically gets rid of that flicker.
Right, cool. Awesome.
I would probably have it full-size JPEG. It gives you a lot of room to play around with your time-lapse. It's going to be a nice big video file. Depending if you want it to be a little bit smaller, you can obviously reduce the size of your JPEGs a little bit. But I just make sure it's named in a sequence. So I'd go custom name sequence, just call it Rome. That would mean that the files are named Rome 1, Rome 2, Rome 3, so on. So when you open it up, if I was opening that straight into Premiere Pro, it will identify it as a sequence, so it can open it up as a video file rather than individual photos.
Right, okay.
I'll show you what I mean
Cool.
in a sec. But in exactly the same way I've already edited this one. I can show you if I reset it. So that's the edit, and you can just see the before.
Yeah, wow.
In the same way, I'd export that entire night sequence. I guess this is the time-consuming part of time lapses, waiting for 200 files to export, especially if you're doing full-size JPEG. So that's where you might want to go work on something else, take a break as it's exporting. Yeah, exactly. So it's never a big problem for me. Other stuff to do. But what that looks like once you've exported those two entire sequences, I'll show you in Premiere Pro basically what I would do from there to create. So I've got one that I've kind of already created there. I'll just play that back. You can see that's the day clip. I think it's lagging a bit on the screen there by the looks of it.
No, it looks pretty
playing
good.
Back.
It looks pretty good here. Yeah, the version that you're getting back is like a low quality version, but yeah, no, it's coming through really well.
Okay, cool. So yeah, you can see there, I've just added in a few effects, kind of making it kind of shift from day to night. Just from using those kind of two separate clips, which I'll kind of show you exactly how I've done that. So to bring those into Premiere, basically, so this is the entire sequence there. If I just come to the very first photo and come down to options when I'm importing, make sure that image sequence box is ticked. That means it's going to bring in the entire sequence as a clip, as opposed to if I selected the entire sequence and brought them in individually, it would just open them up as photos.
Right.
So that's that little box. If I just select the first one and image sequence, it's going to bring it in as a clip. So then I've got my time-lapse clip there from the night. This one seems to actually be kind of pulsing in and out a little bit, which means it can be a few reasons, but even like if you forget to turn it off, autofocus, a few reasons, you can see how it's kind of pulsing a little bit. Yeah. Which thankfully you can fix quite easily in Premiere Pro as well, or After Effects even. So warp stabilizer is what I would generally use for that. You can sometimes...
I wouldn't have thought that would work for that kind of adjusting in and out, but that makes sense.
Yeah, it works perfectly. Even things like if you accidentally kick your tripod and you've got like, provided it's not, you haven't knocked it over or it's not too dramatic, you can actually usually save clips with warp stabilizer as well. So even, and I might go through this next week, I've even shot some kind of cinemagraphs or time-lapse, but I guess that you'd call them cinemagraphs handheld. So they're a little bit shaky, but I've actually used warp stabilizer to kind of no motion. Is an option there for warp stabilizer. You can stabilize them provided they're reasonably steady as well. So nice. I use that a lot. Things like hyperlapses as well. I use it a lot. So warp stabilizers saved a lot of my footage over the years. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's probably one of my favorite tools in Premiere Pro or After Effects.
Nice.
So I guess for this clip, the main thing when you've brought in your day and night clip, I would just overlap them a little bit and then try and line them up as best as possible. So you can see how they're not quite lined up real well. if I come over to, because this is probably the time consuming part, if I come over to this clip here, you can see I've rotated it a little bit to help line it up. I've also had to zoom in a little bit just to adjust the frame. And I do that by kind of turning down the opacity. So if I turn it down to say 50%, you can move it around and try and line it up as best as possible.
Right.
Of course, if you left your tripod there and just shot one sequence, you wouldn't have to do this, which is nice. But if you come back and you've tried to line it up as best as possible, you can then just use your opacity to try and line it up as best as possible. I think this one still isn't perfect, but that's how I would do that to line it up a bit better. The next thing I would do once they're kind of lined up is just apply, I'll just delete this one and come back to here, just apply a really simple effect. So even something like cross dissolve, which means it's slowly just going to dissolve away to reveal the clip underneath, is a really simple one to kind of take it from day to night. That one's still not lined up perfectly, so I'd probably want to spend a little bit more time doing that. But if I play that, it's just going to slowly dissolve to the night clip.
Wow,
so
just a straight up cross dissolve transition.
Yeah, that's the most simplest way to do it. And I've done that a lot with, I might show you another example here. So where are we? This vivid time lapse, I've got quite a bit, like this one where it's just kind of goes straight into the night one, which again, I just use cross dissolve for something simple like that. You can add in other effects and different things. For this one, I added in a bit of a glitch kind of transition, but you can really play around with it. And there's so many different kind of transitions and tools you can use in Premiere Pro. And even if you're new to Premiere Pro, the great thing, there's so many that you can download that people have already made, plugins and different things that you can use. And in some ways you can use them to learn as well, because if you drop them onto your clip, you can see what was actually changed in the effects control, so you can kind of learn and maybe create your own next time as well. So
do you use any, like, do you have any go-to external plugins or ones that you've created yourself?
I've got like a glitch one that I sometimes use. Definitely for photo editing, I've got presets and stuff I use. In Premiere, I've got a couple of simple ones and like a glitch and just a flicker and a few different things like that. But I've often used a lot of others as well. So you can definitely come up and develop your own the more you use it, which is good.
Nice.
And that's the other thing I really like about Premiere Pro. It's only probably more recently that I've been spending a lot more time editing in Premiere Pro. Like, it used to be just very simple tweaks for time lapses. I'd do the occasional video on top of that as well, but I've been doing a lot more video lately. And the thing I find with Premiere Pro, it's actually it's one of those things that even just spending more time in it, you pick up things quite naturally. It's not too complicated. Like, it's a bit overwhelming when you first start using it because there's so many things you can do and there's quite a bit going on. But I found the time I spend in Premiere Pro, you pick up things almost without having to look them up. It comes quite naturally. It's quite intuitive. So I find it quite easy the more time you spend in there, you kind of learn on your own. So that's really good as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's often the windows that intimidate people that don't have any experience with it. But yeah, once you go in with a purpose and work out how to do it, it's actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah, most of it's pretty simple when you look at it. It just can be a bit overwhelming to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've got 15 minutes left, just to let you know, and let chat know as well.
Okay, because I was I've got some other time-lapse kind of stuff that I was going to go in with, but probably 15 minutes I might leave it for maybe next week. But what I can do, so I'll show you an example. These are kind of some handheld time or cinematograph, time lapse, whatever you want to call it. So that was actually shot. I was leaning up against something,
Wow.
but without a tripod. And it's just made like a kind of cinematograph, just repeating, obviously, kind of back and forth. And I like doing these as well. And that's where, again, warp stabilizer has kind of come to the rescue. So I might walk through something like that and a few other things next week. Kind of got another example there, which these locations where you can't take a tripod means you can still make these little clips. Again, warp stabilizer comes to the rescue, because no matter how steady you are, you're still going to need to stabilize it a bit. So
why can't you use a tripod? Like, is it just because you're not allowed to? Like, you're not allowed to like bring like, you know, photography equipment in, or there's too many people wandering around, or too cumbersome to carry? You know, why does that happen?
It could be any number of those, but for instance, like this one's the Vatican steps. So you're definitely not allowed to set up a tripod there. I'd love to be able to set up a tripod and take some time lapses inside the Vatican, but I think they'd get rid of you quite quickly. So
right.
Places like that, you're often not even allowed to carry a tripod, let alone try and set it up. Same with a lot of kind of observation decks and different things, which I think this one is kind of through glass as well. You may be allowed a tripod up here, but there's a lot of places like that you can't take tripods. So it's just a way I kind of taken these. You can still get a nice little clip and shoot it handheld, or it might be you forgot your tripod, or you didn't carry a tripod. You can still create a very short time lapse, but still get something kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, cool.
I'm just trying to think with this particular clip if there's anything else. As I said, like the editing for that would be really simple. The only thing I probably didn't go through, which I can go through really quick, is how I would loop that. So for this one, this is the one I've just dropped in. This was the one I kind of already had sitting there. To loop that, all I would do is cut that first clip in half. So I've got that day clip. I would cut it anywhere really, but somewhere in the middle. And if I bring that clip to the end, and then I could fade that back to the day, so it's going from day to night back to day. Because of where you've cut that clip, obviously if I bring that to the end, it's going to end where this first clip started. So once you've kind of figured out those transition points, it will already naturally loop because of where you've cut that first clip. So I tend to do this especially on Instagram, where it's automatically going to keep playing. I'll try and loop most of my time-lapse clips in some way, and there's a few different ways you can do that, but this is the most simple one, just by cutting the clip and bring that start point to the end, working out your transition points, cross dissolve. Even if you've just got kind of a single time-lapse clip on its own and you wanted to loop it, it works really well. Again, if I had that one clip, cut it in half and brought that so it overlapped, and just cross dissolve through the middle there, you can kind of tell where it fades in, but it's quite hard. If I play it back, you don't really notice it too much, depending on where you cut the clip. And that's one way to kind of simply loop a clip as well.
That's awesome.
Which I generally do for most of my time lapses, if they're going to somewhere like Instagram especially. Yeah,
awesome. There was a question before that I didn't get to. I'm not sure what they're asking, but maybe you do. Dominic was asking, what are your thoughts around usages, especially in the world of sharing content, and on that, have you had a worst experience?
I assume the question's about like if you're sharing stuff, if someone's using it without your knowledge, or using it without your permission maybe, which it happens. Like I often find you can kind of reverse search some of your photos and they pop up in all kind of random places. And I guess it's kind of hard to keep an eye on. I tend not to stress or worry about it, but I'm sure it does happen to a lot of people. I guess it's more of an issue if they're using it and kind of making money from it or using your footage. I've heard examples of people that are quite big using other people's footage and kind of lawsuits and different things. So it definitely happens.
Has it ever happened to you? Have you ever found like what's like the weirdest place you've ever seen like one of your images? Ever seen it like in an ad or anything like that?
No, thankfully I haven't anything like that. I haven't really seen. I can't think of anything too
crazy.
Strange, but yeah, I think like because I sell presets and stuff as well, which is another topic, but you often find them up for free in different places and stuff as well. Yeah, which I guess I'm sure there's places you can probably report it or do something, but it just happens in some degree as well. It's hard to kind of manage or keep on top of. Yeah.
And what about style? Like we were talking about style at the very beginning, or like I guess people starting out like copying people. Like is there is there a cutoff between like, you know, emulating someone's work and like trying to do exactly what they do? At what point is it kind of like, okay, cool, yeah, you've got that now, you need to kind of find your own style?
I guess, yeah, it's an interesting topic. For me, starting out when I was editing, I would find a particular photo that I liked the tone or the feel of that image. And in a way, I would try and copy it, not so much to share, but to practice getting different effects in Lightroom. Yeah. So I think in that instance, it's really handy to learn, because if you can see a photo and work out how to get to that, you're doing pretty well. You know, you're probably doing pretty well in terms of knowing your way around Lightroom. So it's a handy skill to have. But if you're trying to copy someone like that and just share it exactly, that's probably a little bit different. There's definitely a line. In some ways, you're probably not going to do it as well. So some people would say go ahead, but yeah, right. I think, especially when you're starting out, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to achieve maybe a similar feel. You're not going to end up, probably your style is going to kind of develop over time anyway. You'll find your own kind of style, even if it has similarities to other styles. So I think that side of it, I think's fine, and I'm comfortable with people doing that if they like particular colors or different things, trying to emulate it to some degree. I think and it's probably flattering to some people in a way. It depends how you look at it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Hey, so I was thinking, I just wanted to make sure that we could just give a bit of a plug to the artist spotlight video that you did with Adobe, which I've seen. I think it only came out like yesterday or something like that, and I think chat will be super interested in it. And I've actually got it here. Yeah. We don't have to play the whole thing. I mean, it goes for 5 minutes, but should we just have a quick little look?
Yeah, open it up.
Let's do that. Hopefully I've got the levels right here. Check it out. Hey, look, it's TK. 2 TKs. To create time lapses. I think Johanna's going to share a link to this, guys. Super cool.
Yeah, so on Adobe Asia Pacific YouTube page, you can check that out.
Hey everyone, I'm photographer Tim Northey, or TK North. Now, one of my favorite things to shoot is time-lapse photography. It's also something that
But basically, I'll run through some of my favorite and most used tools in Premiere Pro that kind of allow me to create these kind of clips, and some of them I'll hopefully go through in a bit more detail next week as well. So
nice.
Video editing. It's really powerful software. It's also not as complicated as you may think.
But yeah, looking at time-lapse specific and different tools in Premiere that I like to use.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. It's like so I think as Johanna's just shared it in chat. So check that out. There's actually 4 like artist spotlights down there. I love seeing this stuff. I love like creating those like really short, punchy videos, and often like we love the long Adobe Live because we get into like the real detail, get to know people and all that stuff. But it's so cool that there's like a 5-minute like, you know, short, quick version that people can check out as well. So whatever tickles your fancy, both are on offer, which is cool.
Yeah, I find sometimes it's hard to 5 minutes. It's still a reasonable length of time, but sometimes it's hard to get stuff into 5 minutes. So, but it's good to have that, especially for something like YouTube. It's good to have those clips that people can watch for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I'm so excited that we've got you back again. So it's on the same day, a little bit later in the day next week, which is going to be super cool. We're going to be diving into some more time-lapse photography, which is awesome.
Yeah, I'll jump in and do a bit more, I guess, kind of technical side of time-lapse and editing. So just kind of touched on it today. So yeah, thanks for having me. That'll be good. Looking forward to next week as well. Awesome.
And thank you, chat. Thank you for the great questions. And I'm just going to bring up the schedule just really quickly. This is us. This is our schedule for this week. Today, we're at Thursday here in Sydney. It might be a different day where you are around the world. And then tomorrow we have some photo manipulation with Ramesh. And on Friday, also right after, we have Sophie Eleanor coming back as well, doing some typography in motion. So yeah, super exciting. Still lots of content coming this week. Thank you guys for hanging out. And we will see you soon, hopefully tomorrow. And we'll see you next week with TK. Thank you so much, Tim. It's been awesome hanging out with you.
Thanks everyone for joining as well. And yeah, thanks for having me.
See you guys.